Sup digital world, welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later. It is movie review time and we're going to jump right into it because I don't have that many minutes left on my monthly payment for my podcast domain, and I've got another couple movies to review before that time runs out, and I feel like I'm going to have a lot to say about The Flash, whether I liked it or not. So that's why you didn't get a regular episode in the week. If you're wondering where that Christopher Nolan episode is for Inception, it is coming, I promise. I'm gonna insert it in somewhere. But for today's movie review, we are reviewing Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. Looking at the franchise timeline, technically it is the 6th Transformers film in the main Transformers line, but 7 overall if you include Bumblebee. And because this movie acts more as a direct sequel to Bumblebee more than a prequel to the original Transformers, it's up to you how many Transformers films there are and where this is important to in reference of for the previous films. Depending where you are in the world, either this review is coming to you late. If you're in America, you've already seen it. It's already been out a couple days. If you're here in Australia, it is not out yet. It has been delayed a couple of weeks. It actually comes out officially on the 22nd of June, which is a couple weeks away. I managed to get in on a members screening. Essentially every movie theater in Canberra and probably Australia did a special screening of it on Saturday night. That was the only chance you had. So if you didn't go see that, you'll just have to wait a bit. I don't know why. I'm assuming there are reasons why movies are delayed. It's a complete mess later in the year for Australia in terms of what movies are coming out in August, September. That's all over the place. And unfortunately, the internet has no chill. Meaning if you don't go see these movies straight away, odds are you're probably going to get spoiled because people just love to talk about stuff they've seen without any regard for whether people have actually seen what they're talking about or not, and whether they want to be surprised like you were when you saw the film, or if they actually just want to accidentally be told huge important plot points. I say that because even though Transformers has only been out for a couple of days, I was spoiled on something before I went in and saw this film, and it was a big pivotal part of the movie, which, knowing that going into it, took away my ability to experience the shock of that thing. That said, I will try very hard to not spoil anything for this movie if you go and see it, which I kind of hope you do, because to sum it all up, I'm pleasantly surprised, happy with the film. I enjoyed it. I like the direction that this Transformers franchise is going, that was set up with Bumblebee coming out in 2018, a bit of a tonal shift. A bit of backstory for the Transformers franchise. For me personally, I've never hated them, but I've become frustrated with them. I liked the first Transformers film that came out in 2007 quite a bit, so much so that I was very excited for the next Transformers film that came out. And I've never been disgusted with them as they've come out. I've seen issues with them, mainly with Michael Bay's direction and his writing. A lot of the vibes of his films are there's some racist overtones. There's definitely some sexist overtones. Ridiculous, goofy characters. Really stuff that just grates on your brain so much. But then you have some really good stuff involving certain actors, certain relationships. What really became the problem with Transformers as it got into 4 and 5 was Shia LaBeouf left, Mark Wahlberg came in. You lost that heart, you lost that wonder that you got from the Transformers films, and it became just explosions, and the movies got too long. Transformers 4 is like nearly 3 hours, and you get the gist of it in the first 20 minutes. And then by the 5th one, where Michael Bay was changing the screen ratio, every separate shot of the film went from widescreen to letterboxed to IMAX, back down to letterbox. I hated that one. Transformers: The Last Knight might be one of my most hated films ever. And I think the vibe was everybody was agreeing with that. Transformers used to make a lot of money at the box office. That 4th one, regardless of the negative reviews, took in tons of money. I believe it was a big hit in China, which would explain a lot. But by the 5th one, that box office was definitely starting to peter out. So everybody stepped away a bit. I think Michael Bay is no longer really involved with the Transformers world. He's got an executive producer credit, but I don't think he's in control of it anymore, which was very obvious when Bumblebee came out in 2018, which was a standalone prequel Transformers movie centered solely on everybody's second favorite Transformer, or favorite, Bumblebee, the one that cannot speak and speaks through the radio, the one that had that solid relationship with Shia LaBeouf's Sam Witwicky in the first ones. In that film, he comes to Earth, he's got amnesia, all of that stuff, and he makes a wonderful little friend in Haley Steinfeld. The movie's set in the 80s, so it's a homage to those old 80s style films, like the Stranger Things vibe that everybody's still riding at the moment, a bit of E.T., all of that. It was light, it was fun, it had a lot of heart and emotion, which the Transformers films had been lacking. So much so that Bumblebee ended up probably one of my top 10 films of that year. If not top 10, definitely in the honorable mentions. So then with the success of that, obviously, all right, we got to get back to the Transformers films. And then it gets crazy and crazy. I believe this is supposed to be the first in another 3 films. I don't know. It's heading back to the Transformers brand. So not Bumblebee offshoots, Transformers. So Optimus Prime and friends. The promise was it's going to be like the Bumblebee movie, though, in terms of the vibe. And I was skeptical about it. I know a lot of people I know are skeptical. I could not get anyone to go see the movie with me. I had to go see it by myself. But overall, yeah, pleasantly surprised. Transformers Rise of the Beasts is moving in the right direction. Still some hiccups. Not a perfect film in every sense of the word. It will not make my top 10 list for sure, I think. But that's not to its detriment. There's a good competition for top 10 films this year. In terms of Transformers Rise of the Beast on its own, it's what I wanted out of a Transformers film. It entertained me. It was emotional in certain bits. It was exciting in certain bits. It had its flaws. But overall, this is probably what I think people want a Transformers film to be. In my opinion, it's the best Transformers film that doesn't have Bumblebee in the title. So the second best one. Very vaguely, the plot of the movie is set in the 90s. I will say, I don't get it in terms of why it's set in the 90s, why we're doing this like it's prequels to the original Transformers. I sort of get the idea of doing that because the Transformers films by the end of that franchise were a mess. So many were dead. They'd scraped the barrel dry when it came to Autobots versus Decepticons, Optimus Prime versus Megatron. So I get the idea, let's do a prequel of them arriving on Earth. Except that contradicts the first film in that the Transformers have been hidden. But now we're saying there were big Transformer incidents in the 80s and the 90s. They got away with it with Bumblebee's own thing. If it's a nice self-contained little story of Bumblebee in San Francisco, he can sort of go under the radar. But here it's world-ending events involving Unicron, a literal eater of planets, in 1994. So it's sort of like, and I think Unicron showed up at the end of the 5th Transformers, so that contradicts that. So I don't think it needs to be. I think it's messy, but I tend to sort of think of these Bumblebee and this new one as like its own new reboot timeline, especially with the way this movie ends, setting up something so stupid. I can't wait to I can't really talk about it, but I'll mention it on the end of this review. So yeah, it's very strange. But anyway, it's in the 90s. We follow Anthony Ramos's Noah Diaz. He's a classic Transformers human character. A down on your luck, but very, very kind-hearted and positive guy who's trying to keep food on the table for his family and desperately trying to pay medical bills for his sickly brother. In an attempt to get some money for his family, he crosses paths with Mirage, one of the Autobots, voiced annoyingly by Pete Davidson. Although I will say I didn't hate him in this, but maybe because it's just his voice, not his face. He then gets caught up in this new threat to the Earth. So basically, Unicron, as I mentioned, is this world-eating destroyer thing who roams around the galaxy, eating planets. He went to one particular planet which had giant animal transformers called Manimals. I can't quite remember. There was a gorilla and an eagle and a saber-toothed tiger and a few others. Fighting off Unicron's top lieutenant Scourge, who is the leader of the Terracons, who are Decepticons in service to Unicron. Side note, to all the big Transformers fans, I don't know a lot about Transformers. I've not seen the cartoons. So if I say anything wrong, like if a Terracon is not a Decepticon, I don't really care. But don't be upset if I say the wrong thing, and just know that I'm a noob. I don't know what I'm talking about, so it's nothing to be upset about. But Scourge leads his Terracons, sort of like the Unicron's four horsemen of the apocalypse. So these animal Transformers take Unicron's key, which he uses to teleport through time and space to all these different planets, and hide on Earth. So the Terracons show up, they're trying to get the key. The Autobots get involved because the key could also get them back to Cybertron. And then Anthony Ramos' character, as well as another human character, get caught up in this. But eventually what it boils down to is very much like the first Transformers film, which is not a bad thing. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But it's the same sort of thing. It's a human character, a very likable, lovable human character, forming a bond with a specific Autobot. In this case, it's Noah and Mirage, racing around to try and retrieve the MacGuffin, the thing that will either help the bad guys conquer the Earth or prevent them from it. In the first Transformers, it was the Allspark. In this, it's this key thing. All bubbling down to, of course, a big final confrontation to stop Unicron from destroying the world. It was enjoyable. What I liked about the film was, firstly, the action. The action was actually fun to watch. It wasn't just a big nightmare of machine explosions that Michael Bay's Transformers had become. The Transformers characters were likable and recognizable. In those older Transformers films, I couldn't tell you which Transformer was which or which Decepticon was which. In this one, I knew exactly who everybody was, and I didn't know them by name. Let's not go crazy. They're not developed in any sort of way character-wise, apart from Optimus Prime, of course, and Mirage. Bumblebee, surprisingly, is sidelined a lot for the movie, which is an interesting choice, considering how much everybody loves Bumblebee, but there you go. Scourge the Terracon, he's generic bad guy, but he's voiced by Peter Dinklage, so you have fun with that. But you know who he is. You know Scourge, you know Optimus Prime, you know Mirage, there's RC, Optimus Primal, Air Razor, who's Michelle Yeoh's Big Bird character, which helps give a distinct feel to the movie. When you know who everybody is and what's going on, it helps dramatically. It's got that right. It's going in that right direction in terms of capturing Bumblebee's feel. It's not quite there. I think it struggles to find the balance between doing Bumblebee's style and feel, but also still going. But remember, this is Transformers. Remember those Transformers movies? It's those ones again. But there's a lot more brightness, a lot more color. The action pieces are isolated to certain set pieces. For example, the big final battle is in an isolated place in the jungle. So it's not carnage in Chicago, just destroying things. I will say though, surprisingly though, there's some serious collateral damage when it comes to law enforcement officers in this film. Some cops either die horribly or you have to assume are horrifically injured in car accidents. It's very out of place for the otherwise lighthearted tone of the film. I thought Anthony Ramos was a great lead protagonist. He's no Haley Steinfeld, but I don't think anyone can be. But if the goal was to make a new Sam Witwicky style character, I thought he was great. And they did a good thing in this film as well, where it's always been like, why are the humans the center of the film when we've come to see Transformers? I mean, all they can really do is run and hide and try not to get stepped on. But they find a way for Noah to actually engage in the action and be a legitimate part of what's going on, which was a good direction to go, I think, in. Otherwise, you really just like, why are you just constantly putting these human characters in danger? Some issues with the film. There is some pacing issues. It really jumps from action piece to sitting down talking. And when everybody sits down and starts talking, the film kind of just screeches to a halt. And a lot of conversations that the human characters have with each other, they do the same conversation like 3 or 4 times. And you get it. You understand what they're going to do. If you've ever seen any movie ever, you know pretty much what's going to happen as a result of those conversations. You kind of just want to get back to, especially when you're actually enjoying the action for once, you kind of just want to get back to it. The 90s thing is actually kind of annoying, and it takes you out of the film because it's not subtle. It's kind of like Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel does the same sort of thing where it's set in the 90s, And I understand why, because Captain Marvel has to be introduced before Iron Man, so it can establish that Fury knew her and could summon her for the big Avengers final battle. But specifically setting it in the 90s, but then not taking advantage of that set piece. It stands out a lot more in this one because it says it's 1994, but then it's like they're worried you'll forget it's the 90s. No one's acting like they're in the 90s. No one has the style, the swagger, the cheesiness. It's all things you remember from the 90s. So it might be subtle, like a kid will show up with the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers on his t-shirt. I actually liked that, but I'm Power Rangers biased. But then it's hit you over the head. Here's the skyline of New York. Oh, look, it's the World Trade Centers. Remember? Because 9/11 hasn't happened yet because it's the 90s. Or this guy is currently watching Boys in the Hood because it's a movie that came out in the 90s. Now he's watching the trial of O.J. Simpson because that's something big that happened in the 90s. Stuff like that, which really takes you out of the film, and it was annoying for me. That could be a nitpick, but if you're going to set it in the 90s and your whole thing is like, look, this Transformers film is set in the 90s, you have to make it work seamlessly. You can't just show references to the 90s and be like, cool, we've covered it. Now everybody still talks like they're in 2023. And the ending of the film. As the movie was wrapping up, I thought it was interesting, even though it's got the Bumblebee feel. It was sort of doing that thing all the Transformers films are notorious for, where once the big action set piece is over, the movie nopes out of there. The funniest is Dark of the Moon. What Leonard Nimoy's Sentinel Prime is killed, and then they stand on his corpse, and Peter Cullen goes, I am Optimus Prime, and the credits just smash up, and you're like, that's it, movie's over. It seems like it's doing it in this one, but it has a better sort of wrap up of where the characters are going and what they're doing. They don't just cut to credits while they're standing on the battlefield. But then they have this scene at the end of the movie. I'm convinced it was supposed to be a mid-credit scene. I don't know why they decided this should be the end of the movie. But it's a tease for what they have planned for this franchise, specifically an idea to cross over with another franchise. The way they do it is clunky, it's messy as hell, and once you realize what they're alluding to and what this other franchise is that's going to get involved in Transformers, you have to laugh because you're like, what can these people possibly do against giant robots smashing their way through the world? And it's so weird that that's how the movie ends. It had a perfect little ending right before, wrapped everything up, cut to black. They should have then had the credits come up for a bit and then do this scene. It's a mid-credit scene. It's a post-credit scene. But no, that's officially our end of the movie, is our main character looking at a card that literally has it winking at the audience. That takes the movie down a peg for me because it's like, yeah, they couldn't just realize they had it and cut it. They had to fall on their own hubris. Anyway, that being said, I don't have that much more to say about the movie, to be honest. It's not a disaster, so it's an improvement on most Transformers films. It's no perfect Bumblebee, but it's somewhere right down the middle. If you're a Transformers fan, you'll enjoy it. If you like a good action film, a good entertaining film, you will enjoy this. I had a good time with it. And, you know, the aspects of Transformers that you do like, they've kept them in there. Peter Cullen as Optimus Prime. I could listen to him talk forever. I would bring him round to my house and have him read me my grocery list because he's just perfect. I am Optimus Prime. His speeches are wonderful. Anthony Ramos' character and his bond with Mirage and all of that going on. The big action fights, the fun guess the famous voice actor behind the Transformers. The music that sort of piles up towards the end that reminds you of the original Transformers theme. You'll have a good time. I think most people in my cinema did. You just got to get past the odd pacing issues, the clunky 90s setting, the ridiculous ending, and I think you'll have a good time. Overall, I give it a 7 out of 10. Solid film. I'm glad it was good. I don't know what the plan is for this after. If I have to see more Transformers films, if they're like this, I think I'll enjoy them. If they commit to that ending and cross over with that other franchise, it'll be terrible. But I think I'm excited for that too. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. There you are. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. As I said, I'll be back in a couple of days to review The Flash. I don't know how I feel about it going in. I don't know how I'm going to feel about it going out of it. So we'll have to wait and see. But until then, thank you once again for listening. I love and appreciate you as always. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.